Hello friends, welcome back to another Read Aloud with Miss Aisha. In this story, we are going to read another fairy tale. What is a fairy tale? A fairy tale is a story that is not real. It has imaginary events, people, and places. That means that you cannot find it or you cannot do it in real life, but you can pretend by using your imagination. This story is called Harold's Fairy Tale. And in this story, we are going to go on an adventure with Harold and his magic crayon. Let's get started. One evening, Harold got out of bed and took his purple crayon and the moon along and went for a walk in an enchanted garden. Nothing grew in it. If he hadn't known it was an enchanted garden, Harold scarcely would have called it a garden anyways. To find out what the trouble was, Harold decided to ask the king. Kings live in large castles. Harold had to make sure the castle was big enough to be the king's. He didn't want to waste time talking to any princesses or earls or dukes. This was a king's castle, all right. It had tall towers and a big drawgate to keep out people that the king didn't want to see. But when the drawgate was drawn close, it kept Harold out too. Harold shouted for the king to come down and let him in, but the gate didn't open. He walked along the edge of the enchanted garden beside the smooth wall of the castle until he thought of his purple crayon. A person smaller than a very small mouse would be able to get in it. Without even bending, he walked into a very small mouse hole. He walked through the mouse hole into the castle. He invited the mouse in too, but the mouse preferred to stay outside. He gazed around inside the big castle. Harold felt very tiny. And the king might not pay much attention to anybody who was smaller than a mouse. So Harold used his purple crayon again. He made sure he was as tall as 4.5 of stairs, his usual height. Then he climbed up the stairs looking for the king. He went up and up and up until he got so tired he couldn't climb another step. Luckily, there were no more steps. He had reached the top. He still couldn't find the king, but he remembered kings sat on thrones. The king's throne looked very comfortable. Harold thought the king wouldn't mind if he had rested a few minutes. He sat on the throne wondering what it was like to be a king and what it was like wearing a crown. He tried it with the king's crown. It was all right for a while, but the crown began to feel heavy. Friends, do you think Harold really drew his way into a castle by using a mouse door, then walked all the way up those stairs and tried on a king's crown? I wonder if that's real or imaginary. So Harold put on the king's head. As he thanked the king for the loan of the crown, he noticed the king looked sad, no doubt because of the garden. He asked the king if the trouble was due to a witch or a giant. The king couldn't say which. He looked sad and helpless. Evidently, the giant or witch, if the king couldn't tell which it was invisible. But Harold told the king not to worry. What do you think Harold's gonna do? He set off to find the invisible witch or giant, brandishing his purple crayon, and accidentally it made a hole in the wall. The accident embarrassed Harold, but the hole was the handiest way out of the castle, and he climbed through it. When he looked down from the other side of the hole, he realized he had forgotten how high up he was. He needed something to He needed something tall to climb down on, something as tall as a steeple. To fill the hole in the castle, Harold had a handsome and useful clock in it. He was surprised to see how late it was. He slid down the steeple to find the invisible witch or giant right away. It wasn't a steeple, it was a pointed hat. It was a giant witch. The purple crayon made it plain. It was an invisible giant witch. Well, no wonder nothing grew in the enchanted garden. How could anything grow, Harold said to himself, with a giant witch tramping around with big feet? Now that he saw what the trouble was, all Harold had to do was drive the witch out of the enchanted garden. Mosquitoes, mosquitoes, Harold knew, will drive anybody out of the garden. The mosquitoes drove out the witch. They also were driving Harold out of the garden. He had to make smoke to get rid of the mosquitoes. And he had once heard somebody say, "Where there's smoke, there must be fire." To put out the fire, first he thought of fire engines, but he decided to make it rain. Rain was easier. The rain soaked everything up, Harold too, but he said it's good for the flowers. He was right. Soon there were flowers. Beautiful flowers popped up all over the enchanted garden, more than Harold was able to count, all in gorgeous bloom. Harold thought how delighted and happy the king would be when he looked out from the castle in the morning. And then, amazingly, the last flower turned out to be not a flower at all, but a lovely fairy. She held out her magic wand as fairies always do when they're giving somebody wishes that will come true. Harold couldn't think of anything to wish for, but to be polite, he took one wish and he told the fairy he'd use it later. Besides, Harold thought, as he started on his long walk home, a wish might come in handy sometime. After all the excitement, he suddenly felt tired and he stopped to rest a while. He sat on a small rug because the ground was still somewhat damp from the rain, and he wished. What do you think Harold is going to wish for? He wished the rug was a flying carpet. At once, Harold felt it rise in the air. It flew fast and high. Whoa, do you think you can wish for a carpet to turn into a magic carpet? But when it went so fast, it felt the moon. It left the moon behind. Harold realized he didn't know how to stop the carpet or even slow it down. He wished he'd taken 2 wishes from the fairy so he could wish the flying carpet would land. But he did have his purple crayon. He landed the flying carpet in his living room, right behind the high-backed chair his mother sat in, knitting. Does your mom make anything? And he asked her to read him a story before he went back to bed. So Harold went on this huge adventure. He met a king, a witch, and a fairy. And he met many different other creatures, like he met a mouse. Harold has went on a wonderful adventure. What do you think in this story was real or imaginary? You gotta think hard. Do you think you could see this happening in real life? Or do you think that this could only happen in our dreams when we're sleeping? Or in movies? Or in books? Wonder what? Until next time, friends, I wish you well.